On today's episode of Lawyers with Game, we have Danny Cevallos, legal analyst for MSNBC. We talk about his legal career and his love of video games and comic books. Please join us. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lawyers with Game. I'm your host, Darius Gambino. I am first and foremost a lifelong gamer. I've been playing video games since they were in the arcades, and I've played on just about every system from the original Atari to now the PlayStation 5. I'm also an intellectual property attorney with over 25 years of experience advising clients on issues related to patents, trademarks, and copyrights. I'm with the law firm of Saul, Ewing in Philadelphia, and you could find me on the PlayStation Network under gamertag EaglesFan71. It's long overdue, and I'm super excited to have my good friend and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos on the program today. Danny, welcome.
Yeah, welcome is right, and long overdue is right, Darius Gambino. I've had you on when I've hosted for Michael Smerconish on SiriusXM, I think 71 times, and this is the first time I've been asked to be on your show. And to say I'm insulted would be completely accurate. So I am glad you finally have me on, Darius. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all true. I can't deny any of it. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe so we can continue making them. And always keep in mind that this series is intended to be a general and high-level discussion of legal issues. It is not intended as actual legal advice. And if you need actual legal advice, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you. As Danny was just saying, it's been a long time that we've known each other, and he's gone through a lot of different career changes over that time, from law firm associate to criminal defense attorney to legal analyst for CNN and MSNBC. So, Danny, I just wanted to ask you to talk to our audience a little bit about your career path and how you wound up as a legal analyst.
Sure. My career path is about as random and disorganized as it gets. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but it's an interesting one in the sense that I started out, bizarrely enough, at a very then prestigious patent law firm out of law school. And really, in many ways, I took the job in New York because I couldn't believe I got it. You and I have talked about this many times. I mean, the idea that I would be at a patent law firm is about the funniest thing in the world because I'm not a scientist. I don't have a science degree. In fact, I have so few science credits, I believe I wasn't even allowed to take the patent agent bar, right? I think there's a requirement that you have some degree of science background. My class, my opening class, or whatever you call it, my graduating class at Fish and Neve, it was called then, was full of rocket scientists, astronauts, unbelievable people, and then me with my English literature degree. After that, I ended up back in Philadelphia, where I grew up, you and I were at the same firm. Then it was Piper, Marbury, Rudnick, and Wolf. In fact, I think it was only Piper Marbury then. And then it became Piper Rudnick, and then it eventually became DLA Piper, which it right. is today. You and I were there for a few years, and after that, I went out to a tiny firm, then to a kind of mid-sized firm. And then finally, I realized, I'm doing kind of a Goldilocks thing. None of these seem to be working for me. So I went out on my own and started my own practice. And I did that for years. And that was, in many ways, how I got into TV. I started just pitching myself to local news stations in Philadelphia, Fox 29, CBS 3, and little by little, I started doing media here and there and continuing my law practice. And eventually, the short version is I ended up with a contract at CNN, and that's a very short version of how it happened. It was really quite a long and convoluted road. I ended up at CNN, and from there, I went to NBC and MSNBC, where I've been for probably almost a decade. We're coming up on a decade pretty soon. So all in all, about almost 18 years doing media after I left and struck out on my own. And as far as my practice, I do a lot of civil litigation. I also do a lot of criminal defense. And that's what often I talk about on air. Criminal defense and criminal justice is a big topic on TV. So that's the short version. Lived in Philly for about 10 years and then moved back to New York. I've been here about 10 years. Still have my practice. I also practice in the U.S. Virgin Islands and a tiny bit in Puerto Rico, but almost entirely in the U.S. Virgin Islands actually comprises a good amount of my practice. And I took the bar there probably 8 years ago, and some of my most interesting cases come out of that little territory. So that's the short version, Darius. We can dive into anything specific you like.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico because you're one of the only people I know who is barred there.
Yeah.
I'll ask you about that a little bit later. First, I wanted to ask you about what you do on television. I know that over the time period that you've been with CNN and MSNBC, you've been asked to comment on everything from P. Diddy to Alec Baldwin to Stormy Daniels and more. So for you, what were some of the more interesting cases that you covered and commented upon over the years?
For me, any case where I actually had to go to the courthouse. So the P. Diddy trial this summer was one of those cases. It was here at the Southern District of New York, which is maybe not quite a mile from where I live. So I was able to go there most days and either go into the overflow room, which was a show unto itself. And often in these high profile cases, you'll have an overflow room for media. And it means you don't get into the main room, but there's a side room where they set up a big TV screen, and all the journalists and sort of members of the public who are just interested can watch. And that's always a show of itself because it's, that's where you get the most misbehavior. People are bringing in sandwiches, lotto tickets. I mean, people are just not serious there. And then you have a lot of journalists who are very serious. But those are always the most fun for me because it's a camp out. It's intense. You're there. You're part of history. I mean, for me, that's what really always appealed to me about doing the news and being in media is the opportunity to be close to major moments in history, to, whether it be the Diddy trial, the Trump trial, which I attended last, I think it was April, the only trial of Donald Trump, the criminal trial, the only one that actually went to trial and resulted in a conviction. I was there for that. And I mean, those are the moments where I think, my goodness, I'm just this, I started out as just some schmo lawyer. How did I get here? And I'm here at this, arguably one of the most important trials in American history. And so those are always the most fun for me. And really, in terms of the style, I like a good old fashioned criminal trial. A lot of the stories, you have to be a generalist when you talk on TV. You have to be able to talk about anything. I always give the example of about 12, 13 years ago. I was at CNN. We spent probably a month on a trial in South Africa of a guy named Oscar Pistorius, the Blade Runner, who was an Olympic South African runner. And let me tell you, in about whenever it was, 2015, there wasn't a whole lot on South African criminal procedure online, not on Westlaw, nowhere. And you just had to kind of wing it. And it was completely alien. But that's kind of what appeals to me in a way. I'll tell you, doing media, when lawyers first start doing news or television, the very first thing, and I'll warn any of you out there who are about to do it, your lawyer instincts, your hackles will be raised anytime you're asked to talk about something that's out of your wheelhouse. It's natural because we as lawyers are terrified of getting something wrong and speaking about something that we're not. And I know we're not supposed to use the word specialist, but I'll just say it lightly, something that we don't focus our time on. But to do TV, you have to be able to talk about absolutely everything. And the great thing about the law is that it's all available. I mean, the essence of the law is that everything we do gets into a transcript or an opinion, and it's part of the historical record. So you can learn everything by accessing the source document. You want to analyze a court's opinion? Go to the opinion. You can't go wrong citing something in an opinion because the judge said it. So that's something that always appealed to me. The other thing that always appealed to me too is, you have 5 minutes. You could make a complete idiot of yourself. You can make yourself a laughing stock online. And part of that tightrope walking is kind of exciting for me. I always think of it as something like skydiving for someone like me who would never skydive, but you get that same sort of adrenaline pop when you do TV. And believe me, I was not a natural. The first time I ever did TV, I was atrocious. I was a disaster. In Philadelphia, as you know, Darius, these are not kind people. And my friends who saw me on TV did not have positive things to say about me the first time I was ever on TV. And so it was, didn't come naturally to me. And TV is the place where I've really come to believe in that old saying. I think it comes from one of those Malcolm Gladwell books, but that you need 10,000 hours. And I needed all 10,000 and more to even be able to be halfway decent at it. And even today, I'm still not entirely sure I figured it out.
Yeah, no, that I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that because I don't think we've ever really talked about it. I know you started out on Fox in Philly, but just that concept, like most of the lawyers we know, most of the lawyers I know, out of law school, they either go and they start working at a firm, or they go in house and they work for a company, or some combination of the both over the course of their career. You're the only lawyer I know who wound up on television, and I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Those initial couple of months or a year or so when you made that decision to try to go on television. What kind of prompted that, and what let you
Yeah.
think that was going to be something you wanted to do?
Okay. It was about 2007. I just left my last law firm and started out on my own. You couldn't find a bigger loser in his own mind than me at the time. I mean, it was the scariest time of my life. Here I am starting my own practice. I have 0 clients. I'd never tried a case. I had no real experience, other than what I'd gotten at some large law firms, which, when you're a young associate at a major law firm, you don't get a lot of deposition experience. I mean, I actually had quite a bit of deposition experience. I was uniquely lucky at DLA. But for the most part, I hadn't tried a case, and I had really no prospects. So I was just trying to survive. And actually, the story goes like this. I didn't even, Darius, I wish I had started at Fox 29. I started actually, the first time I was ever on TV was at a network called CN8. It doesn't even exist anymore. It was down on, what is that, Delaware Ave, or the highway off 95 in Philadelphia. And it was this little, pillbox that I don't, broadcast a 1 hour a night live panel show called It's Your Call with Lynn Doyle. And the way I got on that show is I had a friend, a lawyer friend, who was kind of a mover and shaker in Philadelphia, and he often did the show. And one day he needed a ride. He didn't have a car. I had a car. I took him down. And I got to tell you, Darius, I walk in there and it was like I was baptized. Sure, I didn't care that, maybe 100 people were watching, but it had a green room. They had a makeup artist. They had lights. They had camera. And I just sort of felt there in my mid-30s that I was baptized. I felt like, wow, this is exciting. I don't care if anyone sees it, but this is exciting stuff. Now, the next challenge was, how do I get on? And really what happened was, and I don't tell this story very often, is I had found out that the booking producer was going to be at a very well-known holiday party by my friend, the fantastic criminal defense lawyer, Chuck Peruto. He throws just a banger of a holiday party every year. And so I went to it planning to try and meet this producer. It was a pre-Facebook era. I had no idea what she looks like. It was almost like a Great Gatsby Batman thing where, I go in there and I pretend to accidentally bump into her, finally find her by the food plates, and somehow pitched myself. And they had me on after 5 other people backed out. And I said yes. And it was like an atrocious story about a child killer or something like that. And that was my first time on. I sent thank you notes to everybody. I was elated. I probably did horribly. Thank God that's not out there somewhere. But after that, I was bitten, and I kind of learned a valuable lesson, I think, for me in TV. Because here's the thing, Darius, as I've already hinted, I was not a marquee name. I'm not a Chuck Peruto. Nobody was looking for me to be on TV. But I found that if you pitch people, if you're friendly but persistent, you send them notes, you'll get ignored 90% of the time, which is fine. But every once in a while, they'll pick up your pitch. And to this day, I work at NBC and MSNBC, and my friends are producers on Morning Joe. I pitch them constantly. They ignore me constantly, and I work there, Darius. These are my friends and coworkers, and they ignore me. And it's just the way it is. They're so busy that pitches come in, and you can't respond to all of them. But I still do that to this day. I still have this sort of mentality of, hey, I'm very temporary here. I gotta pitch. I gotta get myself on. And so I think that's the only thing that has sustained me because, like I said, I'm not a marquee name. I'm not, a former federal prosecutor. I'm not some big name in criminal defense. Even in Philly, I'm probably like the 150th criminal defense lawyer you would think of in Philly. And my colleagues there, they're all great folks, but I'm not a big name there. I never was. But I love TV and I love doing it, and I think that's what sustained me this long. Is that my biggest talent is I'm available.
I think it's a great lesson for any profession to be persistent, to continue to go after things, even in the face of rejection. And, usually you get what you want at the end of the day. You might face a lot of rejection, but at the end of the day, you usually get what you want. And thank you for reminding me about It's Your Call with Lynn Doyle. I had totally forgotten about that program.
Yeah.
But yes, I remember it now. So that's a great story.
Yeah, it was great. And it was a great proving ground because it was an hour live TV every night of the week. And that was a lot of opportunity for me back then. And then, once I ended up, I got a shot. And a lot of these were just chance. A friend recommended me to another friend at Fox 29. But once they let me in that door, I was like a virus. I was available all the time, anytime. And to this day, I still am. I mean, I will pick up and hop on the RW train here in downtown Manhattan and get up to 30 Rock. And the producers know I'll do it. And I will prefer, I don't like to do Skype or Zoom. I like to be on set. I think it looks better. Is it a huge pain? Yeah, it's a huge pain. In Midtown, you can imagine getting to Midtown in the middle of the day. It's not easy. But that is, that's my mentality. I probably could save some time and bill some hours back here at the office if I did it by Skype or Zoom. But I'd rather not do that. And I think, that's kind of what's made me top of mind for producers. I'm not a pain in the butt. I put on my own mic and my own IFB, and I don't make a lot of trouble. And also I don't have any expectations. If they cancel me, that's the way it goes. You get killed, you get killed. That's the way killed is a TV term, but yes. If you get killed, you get killed. You move on. No big deal.
You're not going to get killed on this show. I can tell you that. So let's talk before we get into the fun stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your legal work. We talked before about you're probably the only counsel I know in the Virgin Islands. So what were some of the more interesting cases that you've handled over your career in either the civil or the criminal space? Whether it was in interesting jurisdictions like that or interesting cases.
Yeah, I have a great story about that. And it doesn't actually, I'm not the hero of the story. One of my best friends from high school in Philadelphia was he was a Longport lifeguard in New Jersey, surfer guy. He was working in Philly as a lawyer. We graduated at the same time. And he went on vacation. The story goes to the Bahamas. And he thought, this is it. I've got to live in the Caribbean. But for a lawyer in the United States, you really only have two options in the Caribbean. You have Puerto Rico and you have the U.S. Virgin Islands. The problem is Puerto Rico is a fascinating constitutional creature because the local courts are in Spanish. So I speak some Spanish, but I couldn't take the bar exam in Spanish. And Puerto Rico actually has a federal bar exam because obviously federal courts must be in English. And in fact, my first criminal trial in St. Thomas was this. Meanwhile, I'd been in Philadelphia doing like little buy bus, simple possession cases. My first case in the Virgin Islands, it's a case where the government says my guy conspired to wait in his speedboat in the Caribbean as Venezuelans dropped 300 kilos of cocaine out of an airplane into the Caribbean Sea, and he was to pick it up. And it was all a sting. There were no actual bales of cocaine. But here I am. That's my very first case in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so going back to my friend, he moved down there, took the bar exam, and quickly became a huge criminal defense lawyer down there. And I saw this going on. I was up in Philly starting my own practice, and I thought, oh man, if this doesn't go well, maybe I should just follow him down there. So I took the bar exam, passed, and then stayed in Philly because I started doing TV. Going back to that constitutional thing, my first trial, what I was going to say is there was a DE agent from Puerto Rico who testified against my client, and it can only happen in the Caribbean. He needed an interpreter. In other words, the federal DEA agent needed a Spanish interpreter in court because if you've been to Puerto Rico, especially once you get out of San Juan, there's not a whole lot of English. People don't really speak a ton of English. And in fact, I made everybody at the federal bar exam in San Juan, Puerto Rico, very angry because they started out giving the instructions in Spanish and said, if there's anyone here who wants them in English, we have to do them in English. And one applicant raised his hand, and it was me. And you could hear the other Puerto Ricans, native Spanish speakers. You could hear audible, like, who is this guy? And he's ruining our test. So yes, fascinating place down there. All my most interesting cases are down in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're fascinating. Tons of drugs, tons of guns. Unfortunately, a lot of violence, a lot of homicide. But the Virgin Islands has given me some of my most interesting cases, and it's been just a great thing. And I guess the lesson from that is I was pretty intimidated to try it out, and it ended up being just a really great career move. And because I have my own practice, it gave me the flexibility. I mean, I can pick up and go try a case down there for a week at a time if I have to. And it's just something that I sort of created. There are plenty of off-island attorneys who practice in the Virgin Islands, so I'm not unique in that way. But it's a fascinating place to practice. I highly recommend, especially young lawyers who want to start out somewhere super interesting and then maybe move on. Man, they're always looking for people at the AG's office or in the defender's office, and it's a great place to spend a few years.
And it's part of the Third Circuit along with Pennsylvania, right? So,
That's right.
I mean, it's actually part of the appeals system for Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey. So, which is, I always found to be a little bit strange.
Well, no, I have a theory because, Puerto Rico is only 40 miles away and it's not part of the same circuit. It's in the First Circuit. And I've always had this theory that all these judges divvied up the paradises so they could go, because, the circuit judges in the Circuit Court of Appeals will take turns going down there. I think sometimes even the district court judges do, but they will go down there and hear cases. And, look, if the Virgin Islands was northern Minnesota, they wouldn't be hankering to get down there as fast as they do. I even ran into Chief Judge Bartle once on the way down there to do something in the Virgin Islands in the airport. I mean, I don't blame them. I would get down there anytime I could too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we like to talk about video games on this podcast as well. And you and I have had a lot of conversations about that topic over the years. I wanted to ask you about what, some of your favorite video games of all time. And if you have time to play anything these days, what your current favorites are.
Yeah, I mean, as you probably know, I'm much more of an old school video game guy. I never really got into the first person shooter, and I did that on purpose. I mean, as kind of maybe as the way an addict avoids going to the bar, I have avoided, getting into these games because I know I would fall into an abyss. I mean, the last one I got really hooked on, I was studying for the bar exam, and one of my friends had Grand Theft Auto. It was probably like Grand Theft Auto 2, but I got hopelessly addicted. And I got to tell you, if you've ever played Grand Theft Auto, it's a dangerous thing to play too much because you start walking down the actual street and you start imagining pulling open car doors and carjacking people because you've been doing it for hours on end. So that was we're talking early 2000s is where my interest ended. But, I've got the Nintendo Game Boy, so I play all the Mario. I mean, for me, going back and revisiting games like the Super Mario Brothers, because when I was younger, I used to have to wait, there were 3 or 4 of us kids and you have to wait your turn. And some of the new games now you can sort of like back up and start over and you don't have to necessarily, have infinite lives. So it's been so fun to go back and revisit some of these games like Mario. And just recently, my family and I were playing Mario Kart. The girls love it. So I'm more of an old school guy. And as you know, my absolute holy grail of video games is, and I need to be very precise here, it is Super Tecmo. I believe it's Super Tecmo 2 for the Super Nintendo, which I got to tell you, Darius, you are kind enough. You gave me a copy of this game, which I still have. It is the greatest game of all time, and it is virtually erased from existence. You can't find it anywhere. Nobody talks about it. There's no like bootleg versions of it online. The only thing I can find, is the only thing available is the original Tecmo, which is fine. It's enough. But really, in my view, the only football games ever were original Tecmo and then that Super Bowl. I think it's a very specific name. It's Super Tecmo Super. I can't remember, Darius. I'm going to need your help. But those are my games.
It's something like that. It's Super Tecmo Bowl or something like that.
Right.
There's a guy on Twitter who has spent a lot of time doing like an emulator to recreate that game, but with current players.
Right.
And I think you can still find it online there. But yeah, that was one of the classics, especially before we had things like Madden where you could have, the detail that you have right now. Can
I ask your expert opinion on something here? Because I've often wondered this. Why do you think we got into this sort of first person looking downfield for football games? I always thought the Tecmo version, number one, it's how you watch a game on TV. I don't know how to describe that orientation. You're looking down midfield, I guess, sideways down the field. It's how we watch football. Why did we get into this way that we don't watch football, which is like from the back of the head of the quarterback? I don't think you can see as much. I don't think it's as fun. The Tecmo style was the best. I loved it, even with its very, very rudimentary graphics. It was a fantastic game, and the visual of it really did it for me. What do you say to that, expert?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal was over the years to make it more realistic, as if you were the quarterback, right? And so I think that's how we wound up with the kind of overhead view that we have in Madden right now, so that you are the quarterback orchestrating the offense. Whereas where I think with Tecmo, it was more like, you could kind of be anyone on the offense. You could be the running. Once the quarterback gave it off, you were, someone else. But I think it comes down to that. I think it's that people wanted to have that experience of being the QB in a real NFL game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it, because that seems to be the dominant version of the game now. But I've always wondered why they didn't just try to bring back Tecmo for all of us, folks like me who would just be dying to play it. It's so much fun. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you and I do share that in common. And by the way, Darius, I have to make a statement here that I believe Darius Gambino is doing great harm to the legal profession. And let me explain specifically why. I'll give you an example. When I was in law school, I remember, and I was a guy who didn't know what I wanted to do in law school. And I was probably guilty of this too. You'd meet someone and you'd ask them in law school, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to do international law, because they imagined that international law was just traveling to Paris and to Spain and all over and just doing exotic things. And the problem with Darius Gambino is you have created a practice that is everyone's dream come true. I mean, you've incorporated, I'm looking at your background. You've got all the stuff I love. You've got the comic books. You've incorporated video games into a practice at Saul Ewing of all places, not at some rinky dink firm in a strip mall, at a very prestigious law firm. You are damaging these law students who think they can become Darius Gambino, because it's not possible. Most of us end up at some insurance defense firm slogging away for hours. And I know you've said that people reach out to you. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they say, how do I do what you do? And I'm curious what you tell them back. I hope you're honest and say, give it up. There's nobody. There is exactly one Darius Gambino who has parlayed this into the greatest job in the world. Be honest with these people, Darius. Be honest with these young students. Tell them they're heading for some judge's chambers for clerk work, or they're going to end up at an insurance defense firm billing, 3,000 hours a year.
I do. I'm very honest with people when I talk, especially law school students, and I appreciate you saying all that. But I always tell them, this is something I love to talk about. It's not something that I do 24/7. There's lots of more mundane areas of my practice.
Good. Yes.
Yeah. So
I doubt
I
it,
mean,
but good.
I give it to them straight. But I also tell law students, listen, if this is something you really love and you really want to do it, like you, I had a little bit of a circuitous career path. I think if I had gone directly to Los Angeles and invested in, entertainment law or, video game law, I would have been doing it 24/7. And there are some lawyers out there that fall into that category. And I always tell law school students, if that's what you really want, you have to go to LA or you have to go to New York and get involved in entertainment and slowly move your way into that area. So
yeah, I think so. I mean, and obviously, I'm teasing you, but I'm so impressed at what you've carved out this career. But I mean, it reminds me of those days. If you'd asked me in law school, hey, is it an option to enter the practice of law in the area of gaming and all of that fun stuff? I mean, law students must be, especially with the proliferation of gaming today. I mean, you must hear from law students constantly.
yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot bigger than it used to be, honestly. Like when we were playing on the original Nintendo Entertainment System, you didn't really have an environment of esports, right? Because you could
No?
only really play locally. You couldn't
Right.
play over the internet. And so, I mean, with the advent of esports, in the last 10 or 15 years, video games have become a lot bigger. The budgets for video games started exceeding the budgets for major motion pictures, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Wow.
So it really has become a huge industry in the time that we've been practicing lawyers.
What are your games, and how many hours a week are you? I imagine that there's a Darius Gambino basement that is walled off with, it's like, I know you must have a fantastic man cave, and I bet it's just gamed, like there's giant screens and cockpit seats and what do you call them? Like the Top Gun Maverick helmet with the microphone in it. Like I just imagine a total setup.
I mean, it's okay.
Yeah, that means it's really good.
But yeah, no. I mean, as you know, you get a couple hours here and there every week to play
Right.
games or to do whatever you choose to do in your free time. Some people want to spend 4 hours on the golf course.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, these days, I'm NBA 2K is my
Oh wow.
current
Okay.
obsession, and waiting for a couple of other games to come out later this year. There's an interesting. There was a game that came out about 3 years ago called Ghosts of Tsushima, which is like a first-person samurai game set in Japan, and the sequel to that is coming out. It's called Ghosts of Yotai. So yeah, a lot of interesting things to play.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you go between sports. You're not limited to sports. You do the adventure stuff. I don't know if the Red Death Redemption, if that's on your list, and those games. Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah, the open world stuff. I loved Red Dead Redemption. One of my favorite games of all time is The Witcher, which is another open world type game. So yeah, no, I love all that stuff. And well, that leads me into another one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I mean, the whole fantasy world. You and I have been to our fair share of Comic Cons.
Yeah.
Sometimes public, sometimes undercover.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I know you love comics and you love characters like the Hulk and Green Lantern. I wanted to ask you because the stories of comics made a big impression on me and the choices I made in my life. I wanted to ask you about what some of those stories were for you
Yeah.
growing up that kind of made an impression on you. I'll start by saying when I read The Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons in high school, um, that was a book that really showed me that literature or that comics could really be literature, could be just as good as anything else that people were reading. And so, what were some of those things for you?
Boy, first of all, as you know, Darius, I am not normally as open about my love of comic books because, I have this hang up that I'm embarrassed. I was ruthlessly made fun of for, liking comic books all my life. In high school, here I am on the football team. My friends find out I'm reading a Superman and, oh, forget it. It's game over. Like I'm done. So, I've always been a little circumspect about it, but I got to tell you, more than gaming, I'm not the gamer you are, but I'll tell you now, I worry about the fact that is it okay for a 50-year-old man to have a subscription to the DC Comics app, and on Friday night he wants to revisit, the Dark Knight Returns or the Watchmen, which by the way I just reread, and you're right. I mean, those are some of the most beautiful pieces of literature, and the frustrating thing for me is that they get absolutely zero respect in the world of literature. Zero, zero, zero respect. And I always wonder about the industry itself. I imagine these comic book writers, and they have to churn out, and they don't just churn out. Maybe 50 years ago they just threw it out there, but there are references. Darius, everything that I learned about things like Greek mythology, I learned from comic books. Everything I learned about literature was spoon fed to me because they borrow from these classics, whether it be Sherlock Holmes, who is the most obvious Batman, what do you say, predecessor, or all of Frankenstein, who was obviously the Incredible Hulk. All of these characters, all of this reading, really made me so interested in literature because the writing was great. When you go back to the Silver Age, I don't know that the writing was so great back then, but even when I was little, some of it was starting to get pretty good. And for me, it's really all the graphic novels, all the classics. Red Sun, which is a great Superman story about what if Superman landed in the Soviet Union, and the writing is so thoughtful. And combined with the art, which is so impressive. And I'm sure you've heard of Alex Ross. He's a painter. He does a ton of these graphic novels. You can't pick up one of an Alex Ross work of art, Kingdom Come, for example, and not think this guy is one of the greatest artists of all time. And then I look at like a Jackson Pollock or a Rothko print, and I'm like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure somebody gets it, but I don't get it. It's, I'm blown away by the fact that it's not only this undiscovered world of literature, but one that is universally kind of made fun of and panned on. And I get it, because unfortunately, a lot of the people who are super into it are pretty darn nerdy. And I understand that, maybe a little disaffected, maybe a little of the type that stays home in the basement too much. But I love graphic novels. I love comic books, and it's what I'll do on a Friday night after the kids go to bed. I'll pull out my iPad, and I mean, these apps now allow you to completely revisit your youth and find these, old dog-eared copies of issues that you never ever would be able to find otherwise. And I don't know I don't know if we have a word for it in English. If we do, I've never heard of it. But that feeling of nostalgia when you like open up and reread something that you read 100 times back in the 80s, it really brings you back. It's a really, really compelling feeling. I don't know where else I can get it, but watching an old Back to the Future or something like that. But comic books to me, I mean, they're just such remarkable. There's a lot of junk out there, don't get me wrong, but they really are, something I'm a huge fan of, although I don't publicly say it very often.
Well, if you're looking for another one to read, the new Supergirl movie that's coming out is based on a story by Tom King, who's one of my favorite comic writers right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the movie starring Millie Alcock from the Game of Thrones sequel. And that one is really good. But yeah, like all the ones you mentioned, Frank Miller and
Sure.
with The Dark Knight Returns and things like that, just really great stories. And the things that we were being asked to read back then in high school and college weren't nearly as interesting. Right?
No.
So we were kind of drawn to those things because the subject matter was more interesting to us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it almost, as I was raised Catholic, and I remember in Sunday school, as a kid who loved comic books, you start reading the Bible, and you're like, hey, there's a little supernatural going on here, but you never get the payoff. There's never like there's no Thor, there's no epic battle. There are a couple in there, but not what you're looking for. And I always lamented that. I mean, the thing that always frustrated me is, in high school, they would have us read things that were, I think, if you're in high school, how can you understand The Great Gatsby? How can you understand the idea of being an older person who reinvented themselves in their career and is looking for that love that they never got back? You haven't even had a girlfriend yet in high school. I mean, how can you possibly understand that? And I feel like it was so wasted. And, one of my biggest complaints is Shakespeare. Shakespeare, great stories, but I cannot read that. I cannot understand the words that are in front of me. So I would always get back when we were kids, it was the Cliff's Notes. Now you can just probably ask AI to summarize it for you. But back then we would get Cliff's Notes and I would read the story and I thought, hey, you know what? It's a pretty good story in the Cliff's Notes. But reading all this iambic pentameter nonsense, I mean, it almost feels like it was designed to turn off kids to reading, because nothing made me more of a voracious reader than comic books and graphic novels. And, even to some degree when we were kids, Dungeons and Dragons had a lot of, TSR had all these lines of books, Dragonlance, which I just devoured. And yeah, like, look, is it Dante's Inferno? No, but it's readable. And that was a springboard for me to become more interested in reading and literature and things like that. And so, I mean, that for me was the influence it had, which is a huge influence even to this day. It probably influences how I write. I borrow turns of phrase that, I remember The Watchmen had such great writing. I'll steal some of those lines and put them in a brief from time to time. No attribution, as if, I came up with it on my own. It's just brilliant stuff.
Absolutely. Well, last question for you. What's on the horizon for the rest of 2025 and going into 2026 for Danny Cevallos?
There's a lot of good stuff in the news, so I think we're going to be busy at NBC, although MSNBC is splitting off to Versant. They're going to be leaving soon, although I don't know how soon that's going to be. I'll likely be staying with NBC News, so I'm really excited to see what NBC News is going to be doing. They're doing some hiring. And then in addition, being a lawyer, it's just sort of what is the big case that's on your plate now. And then once that's gone, you forget it and move on to the next thing.
Right. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Of course, you and I could sit here and talk about these things for hours on end, but that's all the time we have.
Actually do. We do sit
we
around
actually do.
And we're going to a Comic-Con soon, Darius Gambino.
We will, if you can find us at New York Comic Con, we will be there. I'm not going to say exactly where, but we're the Easter egg at NYCC if you can find it.
We sure are.
Anyway, that's all the time we have. If you have any questions about any of the topics we discussed today, you can drop them into the comments and we'll do our best to answer them without providing any real legal advice, of course. Thank you to my longtime friend for taking time out of his busy schedule as a legal analyst to come on today. Thank you so much, Danny.
Thank you, Darius, for finally having me on your show.
Of course. That's all the time we have. We will see you next time on Lawyers with Game. This is Darius Gambino, host of Lawyers with Game. If you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. And if you want more video game content, check out some of our linked videos.